This video is sponsored by DistroKid. They are a music distribution platform that's especially geared towards independent artists and producers like myself and maybe you. And they are the platform of choice for many producers, and artists will be getting a bit further into that later in this video. All right, so it's good to be back home. My week in Berlin for SuperBooth and other activities as well was just so busy. 2 shows, filming content for this video. I also work in collaboration with Moog Audio, creating content for them. I was also very busy just taking time to make connections with these different synth companies and also meeting YouTubers that I work in collaboration with as well, people that are a part of this YouTube community. It was really nice to meet everybody. Honestly, it couldn't have gone better. The weather was perfect. So yeah, all in all, a complete success. Great success. All that being said, in terms of the gear, there were quite a few standouts to me. There's like a top 3 list of things that I would consider like securing, adding to my own setup. New gear is hype, and so that will be the main focus of this video, all of the new gear that's been announced. But there's also some old gear that shines brightly through the cracks that I thought was really interesting. And that's where we're gonna start with the Oxi One. Circle Live and Synth Daddy were the 2 characters, YouTubers who were really interested in the Oxi One and were really convincingly explaining how it works to me and to my buddy Miles Kundra as well. So it took them about maybe 10 minutes to like sell me on the idea of the Oxi One. So I'm working on securing the damn thing, okay? So them, as well as one of the reps from Oxi Instruments, were also showcasing the, what was the module called? The Choral? Yeah, the Choral module, and the 2 of those just worked really well together. And just to give you a little rundown about what they showed me with the Oxi One and how amazing it is, there's 4 sequencers, all of which have a possibility of different modes. So modes like monophonic chord sequencer mode, multi-track sequencer mode. And so you're dealing with these 4 different sequencers, all of which are able to have different sequencer modes and multiple tracks per sequencer as well. So you're not limited to 1 track per sequence, let's say. It sends MIDI information or CV gate information, or both at the same time. In terms of these sequencers, controls and parameters, things like sequencer direction, chords, scale, starting point, and even like a randomization mode. All of this really reminded me of the sequencer on the Polyend Play. It had a similar sort of feel to it. So just to give you a reference there, you're also able to have varying pattern lengths in between the sequences as well, something that's becoming more common these days. The first thing that pops to mind is with one of the newest updates on the SB404. It allows you to do just that. You're able to loop different length patterns within your sequence, which is really interesting, kind of taking a page out of the Ableton Live book in a standalone unit, which is, there's like a random melody chord program which will latch onto the key of your track. And if you decide to change the chord or key within that given sequence, it'll just keep track with that and latch onto that as well in real time. Circle Live was explaining that if you're on the road, you could program melodies and parts to like a smaller condensed setup, let's say maybe with just the Oxi One and your laptop, or you know, a compact setup, let's say. And then when you get home, you could simply blow up and reroute those saved sequences onto different instruments, maybe like a bigger home setup. Or let's say you're already using a bigger setup and you want a different flavor for, let's say, a melody that you're sending information to. You could just switch out one of the dawless instruments for a new one, and you'll be sending the same information to that as well. These are all just things that really blew my mind, and I'm really happy that I got to see the Oxi Instruments booth. It was like last minute on the last day of the festival, so super happy to have stopped by. Because it was like so last minute, I kind of feel like it was sort of meant to be in a way. It's not even like a newly released unit. I mean, it's about a year old now, I think, which is still new, but it's not, you know, SuperBooth 2023 new. But I'm super glad that I checked it out. Next up is the Udo Super Gemini. I find that pretty much all of Udo's synths are really dialed into that sort of like softer, smooth like butter sort of tone. They all do that thing really well. And I find that there are very few other synths that have that sort of tone like dialed into that degree, just like on lockdown, quite like Udo. And so after this little jam, the reps at Udo, they began to explain the inspiration of the Super Gemini. They had mentioned that they too were jamming on the exact same setup from the clip that I just showed you, and they figured why not combine these 2 synths into one unit and thus the Super Gemini was born. In terms of complexity, the Udo desktop as well as the Udo Super 6, they're pretty straightforward, like I know how to use these synths right away type synths. And that way they sort of remind me of something like the Juno 60. It's like a player synth, you just know how to play it right away. It's easy to use. But with the Super Gemini, it's not that, there's just more to it. It's way bigger. And so let me just rapid fire through a few features. It's a 20 voice polysynth, 10 voices in binaural mode, 61 semi-weighted keys, and they're like the longer keys, which are a little bit easier or more like piano-like to play. It's a digital analog hybrid. There's enough storage for 16 sequences, 64 interchangeable waveforms, 256 preset storage slots. So it's got an extra octave in compared to the Super 6. It's just a giant synth. You have to see it in person. It's a big chunky boy. It's also got poly aftertouch. There's more of like an expansive left-hand control sort of thing going on as compared to the Super 6. And there's also this idea of layers with the Super Gemini, which I found to be so interesting and musical and fresh. And so there's an upper layer and a lower layer. So much like in the example that I played you earlier of myself with the desktop and Super 6, it's that same sort of concept, but all within the Super Gemini. In that example, let's say you wanted your upper layer to be just a regular synth tone and your lower layer to be, let's say, an arpeggio. You could definitely do that all within the Super Gemini. On top of this, you're able to affect and change parameters on each of these layers individually. There's also a ribbon down the middle of the synth, so you're able to bend notes and even play trilly sort of things if you'd like. So there was some extra expression there. I was also lucky enough to show up when Cuckoo was in the booth. Speaking of expression, and I think you guys should hear like the music that was sort of just pouring out of him on the Gemini. So next is another newly announced unit from Electron called the Analog Heat Plus Effects, which I think is hot. I'm still trying to figure out like how it would fit within my setup, considering that I have the Octatrack. I'm going for more of like a live thing, and I think that the Octatrack is geared more towards that than the Analog Heat. It seems to be more of like a textural thing. But in any case, before getting further into that, let's talk about today's sponsor, DistroKid. Here's a few reasons why you should be using DistroKid as opposed to other music distribution platforms, especially if you're an independent artist or producer. Firstly, they are on the cutting edge of social media and new music promotional tools. They're definitely the pioneers in that sense because their platform depends on people like us, independent artists and producers, to use these tools to promote our own music. The amount of stores or streaming platforms that DistroKid distributes to is insane. And they also keep up to date with smaller or up and coming platforms that you might not even know about or have access to. So a perfect example of this is a platform called KKBox, which DistroKid distributes to. You think that Spotify is my biggest streaming earner, but it's actually not. KKBox is, so thank you DistroKid for keeping track of that. DistroKid does not take a cut. They deliver 100% of streaming royalties to you, no extra charge. Independent artists and producers, there is a reason why DistroKid distributes 1/3 of the world's music, which is insane. Okay, back to the video. So let's talk about the Analog Heat Plus Effects. This is the unit that I spent the most time with at SuperBooth, both like just physically and also just thinking about how I could fit this thing into my setup. I'm like really on the fence about it. So my current live setup is very Ableton Live driven. Honestly, I just kind of want to throw the whole setup away and start from scratch. You know how it is. So within the Ableton thing, I think this is kind of what tends to happen with Ableton. I'm stepping like into the DJ realm with my set. It's all original music and I'm just like remixing stems and parts all together to create a set. I'm wondering if I'm stepping too far into the DJ thing, especially with some of the gear that I'm using, like the RMX 1000 is a straight up DJ effects box. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the RMX 1000. Here's a video I did on it. I love how hands-on it is for dawless setups, and even with Ableton, it's great for transitions. The effects sound beautiful. The only thing is that they do sound very DJ-y. And so coming back to the Analog Heat Plus Effects, I went into it wanting it to be more of like an effects transition thing. I'm not sure if it is yet. I'm pretty sure it seems to be leaning more towards like just more of a textural sort of thing. Within the realm of my setup, I would actually compare it more to the SP404 Mark II, but with more precise controls and more of an electron taste in effects. I guess we'll see where it goes. I'd like to hear more about it before committing to anything, but yeah, that's where I'm at. In terms of the UI, there's like a preset thing on the top left, which gives you starting points to work from. There's also an activate button underneath, which arms or disarms whichever effects is activated. On the flow page, you could actually choose and mix in which of these effects will be armed, and you could actually move the order of these effects around as well, which I thought was really useful. If you have any experience with production, especially if you're like a DAW user, you know how useful it is to be able to switch your effects or change the order of your effects. So that's a nice feature. Within these effects, you can see heat right here, which is the most expansive out of all of these. And it's sort of blown up into these bottom controls. It's the most performative on the surface element of the unit. You could change the character of the heat. You have mix and level knobs for the heat. You also have a filter on the heat as well. So let's say your heat mix knob is turned to 100%. If you use that filter, it'll affect the entire track. Whereas let's say you set it to 50%, the dry audio signal will not be affected by that filter. So you could choose your filter type here as well as the resonance. And then you have a simple equalizer. So as I mentioned, it's more of a texture thing. If you want to become like an instant noise artist, this will help. You could also MIDI sync the analog heat plus effects to whatever else that you're using, in which case your effects, things like delay, will tempo sync to whatever the tempo of your brain is. Right, so those are my top 3, but there are definitely some other notable mentions. Let's go through them. Teenage Engineering. The TP7 from Teenage Engineering obviously can't go through this video without mentioning them. Like with the initial release of pretty much every single one of their products, especially recently, still trying to wrap my head around who this is useful for. I think of T like a slow cooker with their new products. Over time, you start to understand like how useful their products actually are. I felt like the TX6 had this sort of effect upon release, and now after owning it for about a year now, I realize how useful it actually is. I use it all the time. I know it's controversial, but about a year later, I actually do think that it's worth it for the price, but for a very specific type of producer or even content creator or a mix of both, kind of like myself, like I'm the target audience for that product. And here's a first impression video on that, by the way. So just like with all their products, the TP7, the design is just on point. It's the first thing, it just strikes you. It's a multi-track recorder with line level inputs. There's the wheel, which spins and allows you to navigate through your recordings. There's like a vinyl cassette theme going on as well, which maybe Teenage Engineering intended, I'm not sure. Just to have like a very modern idea and feel of working with the cassette, which honestly, being a cassette lover myself and someone who came into this game like at the end of cassette life, I find that to be really interesting for that to be revived. 3 stereo inputs that are also outputs, which I find to be really interesting. So you can do stem playback and you could also do multi-track recording within the same jacks. And by the way, it's one or the other. You can't do both at the same time, just to be clear about that. You could also use the TP7 in combination with the TX6 and their new mic, the CM15. And so with those 3 units, they have like a little case for all 3 of them as well to, I guess, encourage you to buy all 3. And speaking to the price, it's a topic that I've sort of covered in other videos in the past. So if you've seen my videos, you know my stance on that. You could very quickly turn it off and on to record ideas, whatever they may be. Like maybe you're not even a producer, maybe you're like a singer-songwriter that uses it to very quickly capture ideas. You whip it out of your pocket, turn it on, put it back in your pocket. It's recorded. I mean, I guess you could just as easily do that with your iPhone, but the thing that differentiates it from just using voice memo on your iPhone, there's an app. I forget the name of this app, but it records the dialogue to text from the TP7. It records it into the app. So that's another really interesting feature. Again, still trying to wrap my head around who this is useful for. I guess over time we'll figure out the answer to that. And lastly, the Polyend Tracker Mini is another one that caught my attention. This thing is very marketable. Like I posted a picture of it on my Instagram and it just went dummy viral. I feel like this is almost like TE level design. It's got a Game Boy sort of feel to it, but you're making beats on a Game Boy. That's pretty cool if you're a fucking nerd like me. In terms of features, it's pretty similar, almost identical to the OG Polyend tracker, but it's in that very small handheld form. Some people are already saying that Polyend got jealous of the M8 Dirty Wave tracker, like the size of that, and so they decided to make a small version to sort of compete with that maybe. On top of the design perk, here are some of the perks you'd be getting with the Polyend Tracker Mini in comparison to the OG tracker. Pause here to read. The only thing that people are now complaining about the Mini is that they took away the FM radio like sampling recording aspect of it. Some people apparently already missed that. Honestly, I didn't use it that much. I could do without it, but for those of you who are attached to it, you win some, you lose some with these new products. And that about does it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that this video helped you in some way. I'm giving discounts for one-on-one lessons for Patreon members. There's also tons of other exclusive content on my Patreon. You're invited to join. There's also purchase affiliate links for all of the units mentioned in this video. Those are all in the description. If you end up using those links, I make a small commission from that sale. It doesn't cost you anything extra. That's all I got for you. See you in the comments or in the next video. Cheers. Or maybe at SuperBooth. Bye.